Hi, Dr. Camden. Welcome.
Hi, Marcia. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I appreciate it. I found you on Instagram, the magic of social media. And as someone who has personally been working through deconstruction and reconstruction and all that comes with that over the last few years, I'm always drawn to content that helps give perspective and language and support in those areas. And so thank you for all you're doing on your socials with that. I know that um, that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to put
Mhm.
all of that content out. So thank you. People are noticing, and
Yeah,
it's so, so very helpful.
thank you.
I already told everyone in the intro before I brought you on a little bit about you and that you're a licensed psychologist here in Tennessee. We were just talking. We're both Tennesseans, and I'm
Mhm.
heading up through your beautiful town in a couple of days, and hope to see the colors. And have you lived in Knoxville for a while?
I've been here for 8 years now. I
8 years.
yeah, I moved here when I finished my doctorate, and got my first psychologist job here, and then met my husband, and we've been married for a little over 5 years now. So
Oh,
yeah.
congratulations. Where
Thank
did you
you.
grow up?
I grew up moving a lot, so mostly the southeast, but
Okay.
no particular place.
Gotcha. I
Mhm.
gotcha. And just one other quick question about your background. What is your faith background? Did you grow up in church?
Yeah, I grew up in evangelical, non-denominational churches, pretty conservative. Kind of upbringing. Was homeschooled for part of it, and Christian school for part of it, and yeah, always it really involved in church and just evangelical culture through books and teachings and focus on the family and just all
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of stuff. So yeah, so that had a big emphasis and influence on my upbringing. And then I went to Christian college and in the South, and so that has its own culture as well. Those who've
Same.
gone to Christian colleges, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I went to a Southern Baptist college
Mm.
in Arkansas, so I get it. So I'm guessing. So your background was strong into evangelical churches, and then at some point it started sort of shifting, and you started going through your own deconstruction, which eventually led to you wanting to help others in these areas, and you
Hmm.
started a coaching business,
Hmm.
correct?
Hmm.
Um, Let me ask you just quick. So you're a therapist, and I know that
Hmm.
you have been very vocal about the fact that as a therapist, you can only practice in the state of Tennessee where you're licensed. But now,
Hmm.
because you're a coach, you can
Hmm.
actually help anyone. You can serve and help
Hmm.
people outside of the state. Let me just start out by asking you, what is the difference between therapy and coaching?
Hmm.
And like, how would someone know? Do I need a therapist or do I need a coach? Can you kind
Hmm.
of dive into that for just a second?
Yeah. Well, I'm absolutely a big proponent of therapy, and that, and being a therapist in private practice is my main job, my
Mm-hmm.
main source of income. And so there's pros and cons to each of those services, but yeah, as you said, when you're a licensed therapist, you're licensed state by state, and we don't have reciprocity in the other states, meaning like I'm licensed in Tennessee only, but I can't go to another state and practice. And
Mm-hmm.
that became really problematic during the pandemic when I was seeing clients, and then some of them were college students who went home to another state during the quarantine,
Mm-hmm.
or just travel or work out of state, and so I would have to get special permission from that state. And during the pandemic, they would grant some temporary permission for that. Um, but then as I've been writing and speaking about purity culture and faith issues for over a year now, for about a year and a half. And as I've been doing podcasts like this and speaking on social media, people would reach out to me and say, "Can I see you for therapy?" And they were in other states, and I wouldn't know anyone in that state to refer them to. And it just felt awful to have this passion for these issues and some skills and knowledge as a psychologist that I felt like I could offer others, but to not be able to do that because of the restrictions of my profession. So I explored more about coaching and how to do that ethically and how to separate it from my license. So anyone can call themselves a coach. It's an unregulated profession.
Mm.
So anyone with any level of education or experience. So with that, you do have to be careful to select a coach who has some competency and has a proven record of speaking to the issues that you're looking for help with. But I do enjoy it so far. I just launched my coaching practice last month. But I am enjoying the freedom it gives me, because I've seen clients, coaching clients like who live in a different country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I enjoy that freedom to see people all over the country, or even in other countries, and I enjoy just the very, like, it's more brief than therapy. Like in therapy, I might see somebody for months or years. Coaching is really meant to be more short term, and it's meant to be very targeted to specific issues. So the coaching I offer is for purity culture, egalitarianism, and faith reconstruction. And so we're only focusing on those issues, which is why it is so goal directed and so brief, versus therapy is more holistic and I'm going to look at more the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health more holistically. And so that obviously just takes longer and it's more in depth, and you get more into your past with therapy than with coaching. So that's how my practice is different. I know every coach is a little bit different, and some do get more into the past or do see people more long term. But that's what my practice is looking like so far. And yeah, I'm enjoying the differences and enjoying just like speaking to people one on one about how purity culture has affected them.
That's awesome. That's
Mhm.
awesome. So I love that you talk about, usually when you talk about faith, you talk about reconstruction versus deconstruction. But doesn't someone have to deconstruct first, or not? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, different people have different definitions of those terms. And so, yeah, so we might mean the same thing and just use different terms. But yeah, deconstruction, I think of it as like, you've got this house or this building structure, and deconstruction means you're taking it apart piece by piece, and you're examining and looking at each piece to see like what is still has its integrity, like what still is in good condition, what's still safe for my house, or what is rotting, what should never have been there in the first place, what's not a good building material, or what's just no longer serving me well. So that's kind of the deconstruction, is the picking apart and analyzing. The reconstruction is, now let me put it back together, build this house back together with maybe some of the previous materials that are still good, as well as some new materials that I'm incorporating in to make this structure have more integrity, to make it stronger. And so I call it faith reconstruction, because my goal is for people to be able to maintain their faith, and to be able to continue some sort of relationship with the church if that's what they want, to have a relationship with God and maintain some faith practices. A lot of times people think that deconstruction means you're deconverting, that you're walking away from Christianity or the church, or that you're no longer going to be a believer. And that's certainly the outcome for some people, but I don't think it is for everyone, and it doesn't have to be, the outcome for everyone. So I want to come alongside people and help with the rebuilding process. But along with that is the deconstruction too. So I'm seeing that in my coaching practice of, we're looking at like their purity culture teachings, and we're deconstructing those, and then we're replacing it with new, healthier beliefs.
I love that. And I love the analogy of the house. You're not bulldozing the house and starting with all new stuff. Because I try to tell people, for me, deconstruction is just really taking a hard second look at what I believe, what I've been taught to believe, and why I believe it. Is it just because someone told me I should believe it, or is there hard evidence to back up my belief? So yeah, I love that idea of the house, where it's like you're going to take this beam apart and say, is this a good beam? Is this still a healthy beam that I want to leave in my house? You're not necessarily getting rid of everything. You're just looking at everything and seeing what's healthy and what's strong and what's sturdy for you. So that's I love that analogy.
Yeah, and I can certainly see where some people would feel like they need to take a bulldozer to the whole thing if it's been so unhealthy, so toxic for them. But for me, I feel like I went through a faith deconstruction in my 20s while I was in grad school training to be a psychologist, and when my first experiences of being a therapist and just really encountering so much human suffering. and trying to make sense of my theology of suffering, of why God allows bad things to happen, and where is He in this pain, and then some hard questions about sexuality and about just hard questions about our faith that I looked at during grad school and continue to examine. So during that, for me, it was not a bulldoze process. It was really like tearing it down to its foundation.
Mm.
I still kept kind of the basic tenets of the Christian faith. I still maintain a belief in Jesus and the cross and resurrection, and just some of those real foundational beliefs for me. But a lot of the other stuff, realizing how much of it was cultural, like gender, for example, how much of gender roles and gender expectations was cultural versus biblical. And so I got rid of a lot of those building materials that were no longer serving me, and just no longer had a basis in the Bible, but were more so, like you said, is this just what I've been taught or told?
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about gender for a minute, and egalitarianism versus complementarianism. Those are huge words that I had to learn about in the last few years. I'm really grateful that I didn't go to church for about 6 years, just had to walk away for a little while. And that's when I did most of my deconstruction. And I started for the first time really studying the Bible, letting the Holy Spirit like lead me to study it, not just read it, but study it, try to understand it, and not just have someone tell me, well, this is what it means. Like I was trying to really dig in. And that's when, I did a lot of my spiritual growth, but I finally found a church that is an egalitarian church. And I'm so grateful for this little church. So let's just, for the listeners that don't know what that is, can you explain what is egalitarianism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, egalitarianism is the belief that men and women are equal in value and equal in role. And so sometimes it's referred to as Christian feminism, or gender equality, or women's empowerment. I use some of those terms interchangeably, but it contrasts with complementarianism, which is the belief that men and women are equal in value, that we both are created and made in the image of God and are valuable before God, but we have different roles, and that those roles are God ordained. And so that is the traditional belief in the church when you look at church history. But if you've read Beth Allison Barr's The Making of Biblical Womanhood, that's an excellent book about, she's a historian, a history professor at Baylor University. So she's looking at it from a historical perspective, and how complementarianism is really rooted in secular culture over history rather than rooted in the Bible. And so learning how to read the Bible, learning how to interpret theology, learning about the importance of context and audience and what the original Greek and Hebrew words meant, like all of that has really helped me see that I believe that God gives us equal value and equal roles. And so in my marriage, that plays out quite a bit, in that we consider ourselves equal partners, and we're a team in marriage, and there's no head, and there's mutual submission. So we have mutual respect for each other, and we mutually sacrifice and submit to each other depending on the situation and the issue, out of love. But there's not this expected one-sided submission because I'm the female. And so it plays out in our marriage. It plays out like in just in the workplace for me, and how I pursue my career. It plays out in my faith and in church, and my beliefs with that. So so egalitarians aren't throwing out the Bible. We still really value the Bible. We just interpret some of those scriptures a little differently than historically they've been interpreted.
Right. Yeah. Interpretation seems to be the key with all of it. Some people are absolutely sure that their interpretation is the right one and the only one. And then when you start, like you said, actually digging back into original Greek and original Hebrew, our community did a book study earlier this year online of Kathy Lee Gifford's The Rock, the Road, and the Rabbi. And it was fascinating because she starts diving into some of these words that have been misinterpreted. For instance, the word submit. She said, if you go back to the original Greek or Hebrew word, for that in the Bible, it actually just means to partner with.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at that, you realize, oh, to partner with, it doesn't mean that submit, that, you know, what our English language means to submit now is to like be underneath, right? And so when you look at it, oh, that's not the original intent at all. That's when it starts blowing your mind. And then when you start reading books like Beth Allison Barr's book and other books, my mind was blown. You know, I realized that there is biblical basis and interpretation to back up the fact that egalitarianism is biblical, right?
Yeah, because a lot of the controversy and the pushback that I hear is that, oh, well, you're throwing out the Bible, you don't, follow the Bible, or you're not a biblically faithful or believer if you are egalitarian. But that's really not the case. There's so many examples of really intelligent and passionate Christians who believe in egalitarianism. And yeah, that's a good example of the word submission. Another one I like is in Genesis when God's making Eve and says, I will make a helper suitable for him. And the word for helper means like partner, means basically equal partner, sustainer, a teammate working together on this shared task of filling the earth and subduing it. And so one of my most controversial social media posts ever is I posted that my husband is my helpmate. And I don't actually call him that, but I was trying to kind of go for shock value because I wanted to see how people would react to using that term for my husband when it's usually used, for women.
Right.
And so many people loved that post, but then also a ton of criticism for that post and comments about, that's not biblical. Women are the helpmates or the helpers. And just, I think it led to some good discussions of what does that word really mean? And that word is used to refer to God many times in the Bible. And we would never say that he is subordinate to us or he is less than. We would never call him as our helper in like a subordinate kind of role. So yeah, so that was interesting when I posted that about my husband and just the uproar it caused.
Oh my goodness. Oh well, yeah, you never know what kind of uproar is going to happen on social media. You always have to get thick skin, right?
Yes.
There was one particular chapter in Beth Allison Barr's book, that when she was breaking down Paul, that blew my mind, because that's, what a lot of complementarianism is based on, a lot of what Paul had to say, right?
Right.
And when she started breaking down the cultural times and what Paul was trying to say versus the cultural messages and the way women were treated in the culture, it all just like, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now you're like, oh, I get it. I don't know, how it's been, it's just been kind of covered up by patriarchy in the church, I guess.
Yeah, by this desire for men to maintain their power. And I think this fear of what will happen if we allow women to have equal roles. Are they going to take over the church? I've actually heard a pastor say that, like, if we allow women into these roles, they'll just take over, and then men won't even have an opportunity. So there's this fear that's driving this desire for men to maintain their power and their positions.
Well, so that is one sort of toxic culture that a lot of people are trying to recover from in Christian culture. There's another Christian message that I've been studying, just the prosperity gospel kind of thing. It's also a toxic thing. I mean, it says, if you trust God, basically it says, if you trust God, good things are going to happen to you. Bad things won't happen. But that is so misleading, and it's really damaging and incomplete. It's an incomplete message. That's just not how it works. And it's sort of the same transitioning over to purity culture, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but the kind of overall message with purity culture was, if you don't have sex before marriage and you do this and you do that, then you will have the perfect marriage. You'll have a blessed marriage. You'll be happy. You'll find the perfect man. And that is also very incomplete and misleading and damaging. What how are you seeing this play out as harmful, like in the long run with some of your clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and others have called parts of purity culture the sexual prosperity gospel. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so you're exactly right that that message of prosperity gospel has been translated, into a sexual impurity way. How I see that play out is one of the myths of purity culture that I've identified is called the fairy tale myth, and that's the one that affected me the most too, which is just what you're describing of if I stay pure, if I don't have sex before marriage, if I do all the right things, then God's going to bring me a husband and a beautiful Christian marriage and a fantastic sex life in marriage. It's just going to be all worth the wait. And that really contributed to my faith deconstruction in my 20s because I dated somebody who I thought I was going to marry in college, and I thought that was going to be my, fairy tale. And our relationship ended, and then I was single for 7 years of my 20s, all through grad school and then a little before and after too. Really desiring marriage and really had a lot of shame about being single because again, here I've done all the right things, and like, why haven't I received God's blessing? Like, why hasn't He brought me a spouse? And so I met my husband and we got married when we were 30. So a little later than most of our peers in, again, conservative Christian South that we live in.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so I see that myth and the sexual prosperity gospel part of purity culture really affecting people through shame for being single, and then also setting up this transactional relationship with God, where your faith almost becomes a bargain of, well, I've held up my end of the bargain, why hasn't God held up his? Or because I do action A, I should get result B. And we just know that our faith doesn't work that way.
Right.
There's so many examples of how faith doesn't play out that way in the real world, and even in the Bible, where there were Christians who were very faithful and who were martyred for their faith, or women who were infertile, even though they served God and were praying passionately for a child. So yeah, so there's examples in the Bible and in real world of how the prosperity gospel is false and incomplete, as you said. And I think the Reconstruction part of that for me has been a better theology of suffering, like I mentioned earlier, and of God's grace. A really more complete understanding of grace as an unmerited and undeserved gift. And so we always hear about grace as in our salvation and in God's sacrifice on the cross for us. But I came to see grace as just any good gift in my life from God, and that they were all undeserved. They were all things that I did not earn through my behavior.
Right.
And so it broke up that transactional relationship that I had developed with God in the bargain that I thought, I was going for. And it made me realize that, like, whether I'm getting what I want or whether I'm not, these are examples of God's grace in my life and His best for me. And I have to trust His best for me, even when it doesn't always feel that way. So my singleness had to come to the belief that that was His best for me at the time. And then my meeting my husband and our marriage, I've believe that is His best for me now. So yeah, so that was a long journey of really deepening my understanding of grace and replacing the prosperity gospel with that.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend. She said that she read the Josh Harris book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, bought into it, believed it. I don't know how, I must have missed it. I think I'm just trying to think about what the years those were that came out.
I think the early 90s, maybe,
Early
or mid 90s.
90s. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was already married, I guess, by the time. So I wasn't really, and with small children. So I wasn't really thinking about that sort of thing. But, she said it was really, really difficult for her. You can't just sort of, for her, she couldn't just suppress her sexuality and in her mind say, I shouldn't feel these things for men. What I'm feeling is wrong. And then suddenly she got married and she's supposed to suddenly be a sex kitten in bed, and it's supposed to
Mhm.
be great. And it wasn't, and it was really difficult. Do you see that with other clients having trouble embracing the beauty of sex because of the uh, past shame that they felt for their feelings?
Mhm. Yeah. So what you're describing is another one of the myths of purity culture that I call the flipped switch myth. Because when you
Ooh,
get married, you're supposed to just flip the switch,
yeah.
and suddenly sex was off limits, and now it's holy and beautiful, and you're supposed to just be enjoying it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of shame with that myth too. So shame, when in your singleness for being a sexual being and having sexual desires and urges, and then shame when you're married because some people have a hard time flipping that switch mentally. Like suddenly this is okay when it's always been like dirty and sinful and wrong. And how do I turn on my sexuality now when I've been repressing it for so long? So I hear that from men and women that I work with. Even, men, like I've repressed my urges and like guarded my eyes and like just been so careful for so long, that now like it feels dirty to ask my wife to have sex or to initiate with her or to enjoy like her body and sexual pleasure. So yeah, so I think that can affect both singles and married couples. And the work that I do with singles on that is you don't have to repress your sexuality before marriage. You can believe that it's a beautiful thing and a gift from God, and you can find ways to appreciate it and celebrate it, even within your value system. If you have certain boundaries or values around sexual behavior. Um, so we talk about ways to explore and be comfortable with sexuality within their value system. And then after marriage, it's how can you replace those negative messages about sex that contributed to all this shame with the real biblical purpose and meaning of sex? And how can you see it as a beautiful thing to be enjoyed, not to be obsessed over, but also
Right.
not to be repressed?
Oh, that's great.
Hmm.
That's great. That sounds, um, well, I just know that that's a very needed thing. I'm so glad that you're digging into this and that you've been led to coach people through these three specific. I mean, there's a more toxic Christian cultures we could talk about, but
Hmm.
I'm glad that you have felt led to do the research and to know that you have the language and the skills to help other people and put yourself out there. So that is fantastic. We could talk about this forever, but we're almost out of time. And I'm going to make sure that we link your website and all your socials in the show notes. And so people can get in touch with you for coaching. I guess if
Hmm.
they live in Tennessee, they can get in touch with you for therapy. Um, our little community is based on spirituality, growing spiritually, growing in our friendships, and growing in our self-care. So we've been ending all of our uh, podcasts by asking three questions of our guests. So I'm going to start with those, if you don't mind. So first of all, what is your favorite spiritual practice right now?
Hmm. Well, right now I've been really feeling more connected to God when I read prayers and liturgies. Um,
Oh,
that was something that like wasn't a part of my upbringing, but something I've recently really begun to appreciate. I really love the book Every Moment Holy and the liturgies in there. And then there's a new one called To Light Their Way. It's liturgies for parents, and that's the stage I'm in with a young child. And so yeah, so I've been enjoying just reading those and doing some breath prayers with that, like praying, inhaling and praying in one part of a scripture and then exhaling and praying the rest of it and kind of meditating on each word with each breath. And so that's been a spiritual practice I've recently kind of been working on and feeling more connected that way.
I love that. I've
Hmm.
just learned about breath prayers myself. I follow a pastor Oshita Moore on Instagram, and
Hmm.
she does morning breath prayers. If I get up early enough, I don't know if she's doing them right now, but for a while there, I would get up early because I just loved her morning breath prayer time. It was just a beautiful way to start the day. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about friendships? What's one thing you do right now to be intentional and nurture your friendships?
Hmm. Well, I have to be honest, Marcia, since I've become a mom, friendships really have decreased on the priority list. Just in my season of life right now. When I was single and even a little bit as a newlywed, like friendships were so important, and just one of my biggest values. And I spent a lot of time talking on the phone, keeping in touch with long distance friends and going out with friends. So this is one area that, yeah, that just I haven't been able to put as much emphasis on recently. But the biggest way I nurture them is just trying to be intentional and showing up for the big moments. Like that's always been really important to me, is that in long-term committed friendships that we're going to show up for each other in the big happy times, like when we get married and have babies and things like that, but also in the hard times, when a child gets a diagnosis, or when you lose a job, or when your marriage is going through hard times, or you're going through a hard time in your faith and things like that. So yeah, so now it looks less like long weekly phone calls, and it looks more like texts and Marco Polo videos back and forth with
Oh,
friends, just in the season of life that we're in. But yeah, that's been a way to continue to nurture those friendships.
oh, good, good. Well, I'm going to encourage you right now to keep that up because,
Yes.
that's the thing. I feel like women, it's really easy to put your husband and your career, and your children way up on the priority list, but friendships are important. So I hope you will find time to nurture those a lot.
Yeah.
So what's your go-to self-care habit? Last question.
Probably yoga, which I
Oh,
did before I had about an hour break before our call,
oh, good.
in between a coaching client and another one after this. And so, yeah, so I've been practicing yoga for a while now, and a lot of my therapy practice is mindfulness meditation based. And that mindful movement is very much a part of yoga, and the mindful breathing. And yeah, so yoga and just nurturing myself is my self-care, because in my job, I nurture others. I'm there holding space for them, being present for them. And then as a
Mhm.
as a mom of a toddler, I'm nurturing others and attending to their needs. And even in friendship, sometimes it can feel like I'm there, to nurture and be there for you. So finding ways to nurture myself, and sometimes that's looked like, getting my own therapy, or getting massages, and things like that, things that feed me, and people who can be there for me too, and not just me having to pour out.
Yeah, I think certain personalities, I can tell yours is one of them. You're just a nurturing human being. That's probably why you were drawn to therapy and coaching, and
Mhm.
yeah, and then one day you just like go, okay, who's nurturing me?
Yeah.
Right? You just have those moments. So I'm glad that you're taking some time to take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Dr. Camden, you're a delight. Thank you so much for being here today and
Thank
sharing. I
you.
wish we could have gotten more. Maybe we'll get you back on another time and talk more,
Yeah.
but I appreciate you. I appreciate your social media presence, truly. You guys, if you don't do anything, go to Instagram and follow Dr. Camden Morgante.
Mhm.
Morgante. I kept
Mhm.
saying Morgante.
Yeah.
Ramirez is hard too. I get Marcia Ramirez all the time instead of Marcia
Uh-huh.
Ramirez. It's hard,
Yeah.
but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to know you. I hope
Thank
we stay in
you.
touch. And yeah, thanks. Have a
And thank you for
wonderful.
the work you're doing too, Marcia, because
Oh,
deconstruction and faith issues, it's very popular kind of buzzword with people in my generation right now, right? People in their 20s and 30s, like, but
mhm.
it's refreshing to hear from people who are a little past that age too, to know that it's never too late
Yeah,
to deconstruct and reconstruct your faith. And it's never too late to look at how you've raised your kids and what you maybe could do differently, and what learning from that. So I love it when I hear from my followers who are women in their 40s, 50s, older than me, who've raised kids, and who can say like, gosh, I wish I had this information when I was younger and was raising my kids. But it's never too late, and I'm giving them the example now of, I can learn, and I can go back and apologize to them maybe for some of the purity culture teachings, that I instilled in them and stuff. So I really respect that, and just thank you for making that space.
well, thank you, Dr. Camden. And yes, that is true. I have had some long talks with my kids and said, okay, sorry I drug you to this and that. And, I was learning too. We're all just learning. And it's interesting, though, I will say before we go, the church that I've been going to, mainly people my age. There's a lot of people my age that are just starting their deconstruction. It's all over the map, really all over the map. And one of the things that I talk about a lot too with our ministry is how important it is to have a diverse friendship circle of all ages. Because yes, what I'm learning from people of your age and what you're going through is so valuable to us at this time. We can learn so much from people that are in different points of life. And so thank you. I'm so glad that you feel like what I'm doing is valuable. And I certainly feel like what you are doing is so very valuable. So thank you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Have a great one. Bye, girl.
Bye.